You're watching the DSP Leaders Summit on Edgenomics. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content at TelecomTV. It's day 2 of this year's Edgenomics event, and we are live on TelecomTV and also broadcasting to LinkedIn. Today's new content is now available to watch on demand here on TelecomTV and will be added to our Edge channel on the website. Now, hopefully you've had time to watch the panel discussion on how telcos and hyperscalers can work together at the edge and are now keen to get involved. Well, this is your chance. We are once again hosting a Q&A program with our panelists. We are live and we are waiting to hear from you. There's a form on the website for you to use, and that will get your questions directly to us. Now, I'm joined once again by my partner in coffee, Ray Maistre, Editorial Director at TelecomTV. Good afternoon, Ray. Ready to once again grapple with the edge?
Absolutely. I thought you were going to say partners in grime there, Guy, but you caught me off guard. Yes, absolutely ready for this. You know, we've had this great discussion. The relationship between the telcos and the hyperscalers at the edge is one of the hottest debates and one of the most contested debates around telco edge. But of course, today as well, we've had a really good interview chat with Jose Antonio from Cellnex about the role of neutral hosts. And I would encourage people to go and check out that conversation as well. So a lot of good stuff here on day 2 as well as day 1.
Absolutely right. I'd second that one. It's a great interview. Right. For the next 30 or 40 minutes or so, it's your opportunity to question our industry experts. So let's introduce our guests for today's show. Straight from our earlier telcos and hyperscalers panel are Beth Cohen, SDN Product Strategies at Verizon, who joins us from the US, and Patrick Lopez, founder and CEO of Core Analysis, who joins us from Canada. Plus, also from Canada, we welcome Vish Nandlall, who is Vice President Technology, Strategy and Ecosystems with Dell. And joining us from Spain is Juan Carlos Garcia Lopez, SVP Technology and Ecosystem at Telefonica. Vish and Juan Carlos will be also joining us tomorrow for our panel on Edge and 5G, so don't miss that one. Good to see you all. Thanks very much for taking part in our discussion today. Let's get started. Ray, over to you for our first question.
Absolutely. Thanks, Guy. So we've got a question here from an edge specialist at a tier 1 operator. And he asks, we've heard a lot about verticals and B2B, but I'd like to know what the panel thinks that consumers will want and that might drive edge use cases. So Juan Carlos, maybe we could start with you on that one about the consumer use cases for edge computing.
Well, that's a very good question. So thank you, Ray. So there is a big demand on consumers for entertainment. So there has been a classical demand, no? And the edge brings new opportunities for this entertainment. We are thinking about services like cloud gaming or mobile gaming with new flavors that combine this with augmented reality and virtual reality. We will also see a new kind of contents be consumed, so high definition video, but also video in other formats like the 360 or 180 degrees. So more immersive experiences on video. And of course, so this situation with the COVID-19 pandemic also bring additional demand on the consumers at home. No? People now have to work at home, needs to go to take lessons at home. They need also to video conference with friends and do social activity that they were doing face-to-face before now over using the computer, over the internet, and this is also bringing a strong demand at the edge.
Okay, interesting. And I guess what we really want to know is, as well as the propensity for those consumers to pay for such services. Anybody else want to chime in on the consumer use cases for edge? Patrick?
Sure. I think there's an aspect of edge for consumer that is not really well looked at the moment. It's related to IoT. And I think in many cases, we're thinking about IoT for industrial applications, but there is a fair amount and a growing amount of IoT in residential settings. And if we think about all the personal assistants, the voice assistants, as well as all the thermostat and all the video cameras and sensors that we are more and more introducing into our residential environment. I think there's a great opportunity to enhance them with edge computing. And one of those opportunity is probably, if you think about it, I mean, many people might have like a surveillance system, alarm, and it comes with a screen, a box. And they can have also a thermostat, and it comes with another screen, and maybe a home automation, and it comes with another screen. And these are all like different gateways that today are delivered vertically, in the sense that you have to buy from a solution from one vendor, basically. But edge computing in the future should be able to fluidify a little bit that offering by offering the capacity to virtualize all those gateways into the edge, and therefore, I mean, you will be left with just buying cameras and buying sensors, but you will be able to manage all your home experience, all your domotics through a single pane of glass, through your tablet or your phone. You won't need to have another box, another screen to be added in your home.
Absolutely, the universal appliance there. So, Beth, did you want to come in on this one as well?
Yes, sure. So, as you know, Verizon's been very actively rolling out 5G services and for our consumers with with the intention that we'll be adding or offering opportunities for customers. I think there's a lot of legs in the content delivery space. It not only out to the home, but out to the the streaming services, and we are looking forward to being able to have gatherings at stadiums, so we can. There's a lot of interest in developing content at the when during sports events and other types of large gatherings, which right now are on hold, but I'm sure we'll be able to get back to them.
One day, I hope. Yes, and actually, we've got a really good interview tomorrow as well with Neil McRae from BT, where he talks about the use of edge computing for the delivery of video services as well. So that'll go live tomorrow. Okay, so Guy, let's move on to the next question. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Ray. And it's actually, we've got a question in specifically for Beth. So Beth, I'm going to go straight back to you for this one. It's a question about the relationship between telcos and hyperscalers. And the viewer is asking, is there a standard way emerging for these partners to interconnect? Is there like a de facto approach? And is there a role for open APIs perhaps?
I believe there is a role for APIs, but you're correct. There is not one standard yet. But this is, the partnerships and relationships with hyperscalers and the telcos is relatively new in the sense of in context of the edge. And certainly the hyperscalers and telcos have been interconnecting for many years, through direct connect and other types of connections. And of course, the telcos provide the connections into the data centers. But what's new is the telcos are hosting, wavelength is hosted by the telcos. So that's taking the hyperscalers infrastructure and moving it out to the edge and into the telco space. I think that there is some work in the open source community to drive more standardized interconnectivity, and I think it's a good thing. I think that will just speed the opportunity for interconnections.
Great, thanks, Beth. Vish, would you like to come in on this question? Are we seeing a de facto approach forming yet?
Yeah, I think Beth gave a great answer in terms of the opportunity to standardize on interconnect, that's something clearly from a peering perspective has been within the wheelhouse of most service providers lo these many years. I think one of the areas that does seem to raise a bit of an alarm is around the possibility of proliferation. For instance, having an economy based on Google, for instance, as an app dev community, having a one-to-one relationship between them and a Google appliance with potentially a wavelengths appliance from Amazon. You may have Azure with zones. This hardware proliferation is going to become a problem. And the question here is there an opportunity to consolidate? Is there an opportunity to have a consistent form factor where the various different hyperscale providers are able to provision a compute service in a standardized package and consolidate? And it does seem that, given that most of these are containerized services, that there should be a path for the industry to be able to achieve that.
Thank you, Vish. And this whole question about hardware proliferation, that's a great one. Patrick, would you like to add to this question?
Certainly. I see telcos and hyperscalers are two different tribes. They speak language that are related, but not exactly the same. And we see that particularly in the hardware proliferation debate, in the sense that if we think about what edge computing is supposed to bring, which means basically bring computing power and cloud capabilities much closer to the user, at the end of the day, you will deploy edge computing in central offices, in telcos. You will deploy it at the foot of antennas. And in all likeliness, you won't be able to deploy 3 or 4 or 5 different boxes from different vendors or different hyperscalers in all the settings, because the real estate is just too limited. So the current approach, which is everybody push their boxes, everybody push their environment, might work in the short term and in some markets, but long term, I think that having a more homogeneous, standardized cloud fabric environment where you can have a good multi-tenant approach to edge computing will be hugely beneficial for the whole industry.
Thanks very much, Patrick. And Beth, please.
Yeah. So I'd like to add to what Patrick said, and I think it's particularly important when you move to the far edge. The telcos, the CO space, obviously, it's some racks of equipment. But when you get to the far edge and you get to customer prem or light poles or other things, the amount of real estate that you have to devote to multiple cloud, hyperscalers becomes very, very limited. So that's where I think that having a standardized platform will really come into its own.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah, good extra comments there. We really need to focus a lot about these standardized platforms and see how the market's developing. We should move on because we have got a few more questions coming in from our audience. So, Ray, let me hand over to you for the next one.
Okay, great. Thanks, Guy. Yeah, we got a question here that I'm going to give to Patrick. Have we learned anything about the role of edge from early 5G deployments? For example, in South Korea, they've been experimenting with some new services, and we're seeing plenty of trials and test use cases anywhere else. So has anything emerged that we've learned for the market from these early 5G deployments?
I think that if we learn something is that it's still early, in the sense that most of the early 5G deployments have been focusing on the radio, and really to provide a continuous cloud experience with edge computing, you need a few elements. You need a 5G radio, but edge computing is not really 5G. You could deploy edge computing with 4G as well. But more importantly, in all likeliness, you need a capacity to have a cloud fabric that can navigate between the hyperscaler public clouds, between the private cloud that most network operators have deployed, and that new cloudlet, if you will, that is at the edge of the network. And I think most network operators are still working on that recipe. And it's not only a network operator premise. We mentioned that the interfaces and APIs between the public cloud and the private cloud are not really standardized yet. And the third point is you need to be able, in all likeliness, also to do slicing, or at least you have a control in terms of what application can deploy in edge computing and how it's being used, because the real estate is limited compared to a public cloud or even a private cloud. So from all this perspective, I think that what we have learned is that edge computing is mature from an infrastructure standpoint. There are a number of options to deploy edge computing in a telco network. What is being worked at is really the connectivity, but the capacity to deploy services at this edge and services from the telco or services from developers, that requires a larger ecosystem with a platform that is able to expose the connectivity, that is able to expose the ability for the developer to discover and consume the capabilities of an edge. And I think that there are a lot of work that are being done, particularly I'm thinking GSMA, for instance, around this topic, but we're not there yet. So right now, the edges that we've seen deployed have been very local, so a few deployments in a few countries, and in those countries, in a few cities or in a few areas. We haven't seen a lot of massive deployment of edge at scale. And they've been mostly, as a first phase, I think, for a private cloud implementation of the operator, where they put some of the functions that are traditional telco functions that are in the core usually, closer to the edge, like user plane functions, for instance. I think Verizon, together with Wavelengths, with Amazon, is probably one of the first to deploy a more hybrid infrastructure that is able not only to take telco functions, but also developer services.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Patrick. Juan Carlos, you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, well, I'd like to complement a bit Patrick's comments. It is true that 5G has started with services and use cases around enhanced mobile broadband, more focus on radio and capacity and throughput. But we start seeing the relationship with the edge on the first implementation of the 5G private networks, where we have seen in all cases that you not only need on the private network deployment a good 5G connectivity, but you need also computing capacity on premises to host the logic to develop most of the use cases we have seen. So what we expect is that as 5G standalone core comes and forces operators to make their network become really cloud native, and as we move part of the private network functionality from on-premise to the edge, we will see also a higher demand on edge for 5G.
Yep, that's certainly coming down the line. And Beth, I saw you wanted to come in there as well.
Sure. So I think there's two things. I want to pick up on both some things that Patrick said and also what Juan Carlos said. First, the edge is not just LTE and 5G. The edge is also any kind of network. It's really transport agnostic, and I think the telco operators tend to forget that, because we're telcos. But that's very important because a lot of work that we're doing is around edge, where the application is disaggregated from the transport, but the application and the transport are complementary. So that's one thing. And also, obviously, as Patrick said, it's very important that the developer community be further expanded. And that's something I know that Verizon and Amazon have been working on with our wavelength deployment. So we have deployed it out to a number of cities, so it's live today. But however, the developers need to step up. And it's the other key, of course, is that the hyperscalers and the telcos both need to provide proper APIs, proper environments, proper tools for the developers to be able to really to run with this and create those exciting new edge applications that we're all waiting for.
Yep, it's the value is in the applications, but it's a real step-by-step process, isn't it? But I want to say we're edging closer, but that would be far too corny to say that. So thanks, Guy. Okay, Guy, yeah. I'm going to pass it to you for the next question.
Yes, thanks, Ray. You had the best jokes. We've got a similar question into one we had yesterday. And Vish, I'm going to ask this one of you. The question is, do we need to only consider carrier-grade edge computing systems for telcos, or can we also use off-the-shelf compute solutions? Is there a trade-off to be made here?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. When you look at what carrier grade means and you relate that to, for instance, 5 nines of availability, it needs to understand more than just the edge compute appliance itself. It needs to understand the context in which it's deployed, which network is it deployed in. A good analogy is if you look at a mobile network, a base station itself isn't 5 nines available. It's typically 2 or 3 nines available. And the system as a whole, due to the elegant property of mobility, is providing you the full 5 nines, because I can have one base station fail, but I can have another base station take over. Now, the question is could you do something as elegant with cloud computing? Clearly there's some issues here. We already talked about proliferation, the scarcity of resources. There's a number of other power constraints that is probably not going to give you the ability to have multiple different edge compute appliances situated in a given area that's providing a given latency bound to an application group. You're probably going to have an issue in terms of the same type of availability systems that you would have in a public cloud. Public cloud, a compute engine goes down, the mean time to repair is 0, because I call an API and a new compute engine can be spun back up fairly quickly. At the edge, the mean time to repair is quite high. It's usually going to be governed or bounded by a truck roll. So, can I quickly provision a new edge compute appliance within the latency constraints that I need to deliver to a particular application? And you're probably going to be a little bit more stranded in terms of delivering against that. So we're going to need to rethink a little bit of what those availability models look like, because either we're going to need to create basic equipment protection switching and standard old telco mechanisms for fail in place, which is going to increase that cost of the compute appliance, or we're going to have a network capability where I can journal context between peer edge appliances at different locations and have another edge take over and reduce the cost of the individual edge appliances, but from a system perspective, have a net availability that's quite high.
Great. Thank you very much, Vish. Very clear answer there. I am aware and conscious of the time which is pressing on. Now that we've heard from you all, we've had a few questions from our viewers. We've shared the answers around. I think we ought to take a quick break and check our viewer poll. And we're running the viewer poll throughout this 3-day event. And we've been asking you if public cloud platforms should play a role in telco edge strategies. And we're giving you 4 possible answers, ranging from absolutely yes to certainly not. And as you can see from the graphic here, if I strain my eyes looking at the monitor in the studio, I can just about see those numbers. And perhaps not surprisingly, the absolutely yes camp is ahead of the game there, with over half of respondents saying absolutely yes, we should. And probably no surprise that we have 0 takers so far from the it would be a disaster if that were to happen answer. Now we're going to monitor these results over the course of the Edgenomics Summit and see how they change. If you haven't already done so, please do vote. It only takes a few seconds. And also keep sending us your questions for our guests. Send them in as soon as you can now, please. Speaking of which, Ray, any new questions coming in from our audience?
Yes, and actually one that relates to that poll. We've had 0% so far of people voting that the telcos should not be striking relationships with hyperscalers. Well, we've got a question in here from somebody who I feel could be heading towards voting that way. So it's kind of a bit of a statement and a question. So I'm just going to look down and read this. This person says, big cloud immediately jumped into edge computing with products like AWS Greengrass, overhanging and misdefining the emerging edge market with little actual thought to edge native apps and infrastructure. And pointing out that these new technologies are not just an extension of big cloud. So the question based on that premise is it a mistake for telcos to partner with commodity big cloud players without a well thought out framework for edge native innovation? So are the two rushing together? Is there a true understanding yet of what applications are going to be delivered from the edge? So would anybody like to pick up and start with an answer to that proposition and question?
I can.
Okay, Beth. Okay, and then Beth, and then Juan Carlos. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure both of us have opinions about this. So the question does have some kernel of truth there. So the hyperscalers really are just, they don't fully understand the edge, in certainly in ways that telcos do. I mean, telcos inherently understand the edge because we are literally living in the edge. I mean, that is how we deliver our services. So the question mentioned Greengrass and Lambda and some of the early attempts to move out to the edge, which you're right, it was somewhat ahead of where the technology was. Let's put it that way. And but I think the hyperscalers have something that the telcos don't, and the telcos have something that the hyperscalers don't. And what the telcos bring is an understanding of how the edge works and how the networks work. What the hyperscaler is bringing to the table is an understanding of how developers work and a lot of tools for developers to create new applications. That's not something that the telcos have traditionally done. So there's a need to grow into those relationships. And will there be friction along the way? Of course there will be.
Okay, great. Juan Carlos.
Yeah, well, Beth was right. Operators have been historically working at the edge. Probably 90% of our infrastructure is at the edge. And we know what is, providing services and functions from the edge. The edge cloud computing is not just computing. So it is, of course, you need to host applications and data. That's true in the edge. But also you require much more than that. You require a control of the connectivity, of how the device gets to that application and that data. And this is something where operators really have to provide a differential value. That the question is that enhanced connectivity on demand. So it's something that we have traditionally not provided, at least not in the automatic and flexible way we need to provide now. Okay, so we are basically doing that manually or semi-manually through systems and through manual configuration. But now we need to offer that as a service and something that can be sold over the internet. That is the great challenge, but also the great opportunity for operators.
Yes, I get that. I guess the question also is kind of hinting at the unknown. What is this edge native innovation? It's maybe too early to guess. Patrick, you've got a view on this as well.
Yes, indeed. The analogy about when we asked people, if we asked people in the 18th century what mode of transportation they needed, and that they would answer faster horses, is not lost here for me on the edge, in the sense that thinking the edge and thinking of the applications of the edge is not really the driver for deployment of the edge. We know, the whole industry knows, that basically providing lower latency and providing cloud-like computing capabilities closer to where data is being produced or consumed is improving the user experience, and will unlock new opportunities. But right now, if you ask enterprises or governments or consumers what the edge could bring and what kind of services the edge could bring forward, nobody can think them all, really. And at the end of the day, the ecosystem that was mentioned in the question will emerge from the deployment of the edge. What is sure is how the edge is going to be deployed and by whom is going to condition to a certain extent whether that that ecosystem will flourish or not. And certainly, from Beth's comment, I mean, we know that hyperscalers have a great track success in deploying and growing ecosystems of developers, particularly, and operators don't. At the same time, there are regulatory aspects that we need to consider, as well as availability aspects. Specifically, I mean, hyperscalers can afford to launch a product offering, and we spoke about some of them, and discontinue them after 6 months or 1 year if they don't work out, because it's not a regulated environment, and because they in the culture, you have to try, and if you fail, it's all right. I think that telcos traditionally have an approach where they have first to make sure that it will work and to deploy it at scale, and therefore there's not so much room for mistake. So I don't think that telcos are willing to tolerate that a hyperscaler tries 1 or 2 or 3 different flavors of edge before they get to the one that will work. And that's why right now the relationship between the telcos and the hyperscalers is a little bit circumspect, from my opinion.
Okay, excellent points there. Thanks, Patrick. And Vish, you want to come in on this one as well?
Yeah, I think it's important that we get the polarity right when we think through this question. And it has to be through the lens of the developer. The reason why cloud architectures are so powerful is that we're actually abstracting the underlying infrastructure, and you're providing, a set of guardrails for creating applications. We are really trying to provide an ethic of write once, deploy anywhere. From a developer perspective, that's obviously a desired property of how they want to create applications. They want to increase their productivity. I think Patrick brings up a good question as to where the value of edge lies, and it's really on the deployment side. Once you've written an application or authored an application, you could use a service like Kubernetes and apply a taint and tolerance that says, I want to be within this type of latency window, given the fact that this is providing a SCADA type of capability. And then that needs to then be deployed in the appropriate zone. I think we really need to think through that so that we don't create a dependency on the developer to have to create custom application code to cater to something that's going to be specific to an edge. I think there needs to be a philosophy of abstraction and orchestration that happens, kind of under the covers, so that it can manifest the application for the type of workload placement it requires.
Excellent. Great points. And this is why we're having this Edgenomics Summit, and why we'll have another, because there is so much still to figure out for all the parties involved in this sector. So Guy, I know we're getting on a little bit in time, but I'm sure we've got time for another question, haven't we?
Oh, we do indeed. And we have another one. We have another long one, and it's another one that's focused on hyperscalers. It's obviously proving very popular with our audience. Let me try and read this one out for you. The questioner asks, hyperscalers do in fact run major networks between their data centers. So are we kidding ourselves by saying that the hyperscalers don't understand networks? Do the CSPs ultimately get relegated to providers of fiber for international and national connectivity and access broadband connectivity for hyperscalers? Everything else is in the cloud. So are we wrong in assuming or saying or stating that really the hyperscalers don't understand networks? Patrick, I'm going to come to you first.
I think these are different networks. And I think we need to understand that public cloud is composed of mega data centers with thousands of servers that are interconnected through a network, absolutely a private network. But you typically have one or two of those mega data centers per region. And obviously, of course, the hyperscalers are deploying more and more of those, but we're talking about dozens at the scale of the planet. When we're talking about edge computing, we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of locations per country. And one can argue that, one system is very centralized. And I think the motto of a lot of hyperscalers is centralize what you can and decentralize what you must. And edge computing is quite the opposite. You're going to run hundreds or thousands of different locations, and running those locations in an interconnected fashion and being able to transfer state and mobility across those locations is probably something that telcos have a lot more experience than hyperscalers today. Having said that, we've seen that hyperscalers have been able to adopt and adapt very fast when it comes to technology challenges, including connectivity. So it doesn't mean that they won't be able to get it and get there. But right now, if we're talking about networking, I think that telcos still have a couple of things that they know better to do than hyperscalers for distributed networks.
Thank you, Patrick. Different networks. Any of our other guests want to come in on this one? Because I think we are going to probably make this our last question. Beth.
Speaking from a telco perspective, and Patrick was absolutely right that the hyperscalers understand how to build networks inside a data center and, of course, across data centers. But what they don't understand is the distributed networks, and distributed networks are a lot more complex. Also, there's regulatory issues. I remember a number of years ago having a very weird conversation with a major hyperscaler about peering, and I had to explain to them how telco peering worked, and that it wasn't just free network connectivity. So, absolutely, they can learn. And the telcos can learn, how to build, developer ecosystems as well. But does it make sense? Does it make sense for the hyperscalers to become telcos and telcos to become hyperscalers? And I think the answer is no. We should focus on what we're really good at and integrate with the party. We're partners. We can't go it alone.
Thank you, Beth. Celebrate our differences and work to our strengths. Great. Well, if nobody else wants to add to that viewer's question, then Ray, I think we're probably good to wrap things up. In which case, thank you very much, everyone. But that is all the time we do have for today's Q&A panel. Big thank you to all our guests and to my colleague Ray there for the questions and the answers, and to all of you watching the program and sending your questions. It's all very much appreciated. We do like your feedback and your engagement with us. We'll be back again tomorrow for another live Q&A program on TelecomTV and LinkedIn. But before then, we have not one, but two panel discussions tomorrow that look at the Edgenomics of 5G and also enterprise customer premises. And of course, Ray returns with another executive keynote interview. We do hope you can join us again tomorrow, but until then, thank you very much for watching and goodbye.